let's start with what we saw last night, because Seattle went into San Francisco, and I don't care what the final score was. Seahawks got their butts kicked, right? Like, so I'm sitting here, Frank, trying to make, because I feel like every time we talk and every time we hang out, I'm trying to figure out, is Seattle really good? Is Seattle not really good? They lose to Detroit in a game that I thought was really plucky, and I'm like, no, this is a good team. I watched them last night and thought, no, this isn't a good team. Like, where are you on Seattle at this point?
I just think it's the Seahawks are mediocre. They're going to be in playoff contention. They're fine. But what we saw last night is what we saw each of the last 2 seasons. Is part of the reason Pete Carroll's not there anymore. They're just not in the same zip code as the 49ers. The 49ers beat them up, pushed them around. Yeah, Seattle got back in the game. They had chances to win. It's a little concerning for the 49ers, actually. But I'm with you. What we saw when they were building that 23-3 lead, actually, it said more to me about the 49ers than the Seahawks. I just think the Seahawks are what they are. They're going to be this 9, 8, maybe 10 if everything breaks well team. Whereas everybody was kind of lukewarm on the 49ers coming into this game. And maybe they're not that good. Maybe the 49ers are fine. They're a top 5 team in the NFL. They're going to get healthier as we go along. They're still able to turn anybody's lights out. They can still win a Super Bowl. That's what last night showed to me through, 3 quarters and a few minutes when they built that 23-3 lead. They're going to have to get better in the second half. They've already blown 2 games in the fourth quarter. Almost blew that one last night. But overall, I just think what last night said is Seattle's kind of mediocre, which we probably thought, and San Francisco's just as good as we thought they were going to be coming into the season. What's the laugh for? What is the laugh for? Come on, we haven't even started yet, Charles.
Because when we went into this game, it was I did a few media hits heading into Thursday, and it was still this. Are we worried about Brock Purdy? Like, is it? And I allowed myself at one point. I'm not going to say what show it was on, but I felt
why? Because I want to look up. I want to look up the audio and hold it against you. Come on.
I allowed myself to get into the. Man, is Christian McCaffrey? Does he really mean this much to this offense? Like, does it just not having Christian McCaffrey out there radically change how efficient it can be, how explosive it can be, what kind of quarterback Brock Purdy is going to be from a week-to-week consistency standpoint. And then last night I'm looking at it and I'm like, we got to stop having, and me personally, I have to stop doing this every 2 or 3 games. What is Brock Purdy? Let's reassess. What's Purdy now? Oh, geez, everything hasn't been perfect. Oh, they're struggling. There are so many teams across the league struggling right now. And the favorites, we tend to go into this panic mode when a favorite struggles, a stacked team struggles. But last night, I'm sitting there and I'm staring at the Niners offense. I'm like, Ayuk, Deebo Samuel, George Kittle, especially when Kittle's healthy, Jordan Mason, who am I'm leaving somebody out.
Trent Williams, maybe the greatest tackle of all time.
Yeah, Trent Williams. Who am I leaving out on the wide receiver front? Oh, Juwan Jennings, right? Juwan Jennings. That's who I was leaving out. Yeah. So I'm sitting there and I'm going, from a skill position standpoint, Isaac Guerrendo just steps in last night and rips off. I mean, if there's one thing that guy can do, he can run straight very fast. He showed that at Louisville. And so I sat there and I'm like, they're fine. Like we have to allow them moments to sort themselves out, just like we do every other team. And I have to continue to repeat over and over, the first 4 games of the season are the preseason, and then the next 4 games in the season are essentially, that's where your season's really kicking off. You should be finding your chemistry at that point and starting to click. And I just think that lead, when you go back and you watch it, I felt like they took the gas pedal off late. I really did. I felt like they built that lead. It got a little comfortable, and then they softened up a little bit. But, when Nick Bosa's playing at a high level, it's still the same team with so much potential to be destructive defensively and still as stacked as ever offensively. And I think, like a number of the teams we loved coming into the season, I think they're going to be there at the end of the season. And really, that's what matters.
I feel like, look, you guys know I love my 80s wrestling analogies. Like Hacksaw Jim Duggan used to walk into the wrestling ring and just go, oh, with the big 2x4 over his shoulder. That's how I feel every time Brock Purdy has a throw like he did last night to George Kittle in the end zone. Because there just aren't a lot of quarterbacks that can throw the ball that perfectly, that accurately in that situation. Like there was 1 inch that ball could go into, and he squeezed it in. And I just found myself being like, oh, because I've been saying it for a long time. The funny thing is to me, at some point, I just don't care where he was drafted. And at some point, I don't care who his head coach is. I'm just looking at a quarterback that is executing. This year, he's using athleticism. He's running around sometimes. He's making plays we didn't know he could make. And he still delivers an incredibly accurate football on time every single time he seems to need to. Like, yes, even really good quarterbacks will occasionally have okay games or bad games. That happens to all of them. I'm just tired of every time he has a bad game, it becoming this narrative that Brock Purdy isn't any good. Like, he's proven he's going to get paid. He should get paid. He's among the better quarterbacks in the NFL.
And Fitz, I had a conversation yesterday. I was talking to a personnel man, and it was prior to the game. And we weren't talking about the 49ers, but he brought up Kyle in the midst of the conversation. And I was asking him, I asked him something about the Rams, and I said, hey, I brought up something I brought up on the show. I was like, hey, do you think if for some reason Stafford is in a Rams uniform next year, could Darnold be the fit there if he leaves Minnesota, yada, yada, yada. And he said to me, I don't know. He said, the one thing you have to think about, he said, Sean will ruin a quarterback. Like if Sean is not happy with you, if he's upset, as a quarterback, you have to be able to take the mental toll of dealing with Sean McVay's expectations. And then he said, it's like Kyle Shanahan in San Francisco. And he said, it is an underrated part of the assessment and the value of quarterbacks who play for those two individuals. You have to be able to take the mental toll of what it's like to deal with a Sean McVay, a Kyle Shanahan. If you're Bo Nix, occasionally you got to get in Sean Payton's ass on the sideline, right? Like you're just going to go, no, I'm not going to do this anymore and get, I've had it and I'm going to give it back. So that's another thing too. I think that maybe we undervalue about Purdy that why don't we count that amongst the, oh, he can do this. He can throw this. Here are the stats. He can move around. Well, maybe dealing with Kyle Shanahan should also be a stat. That should be a stat. Can you keep yourself out of his doghouse?
We'll get True Media on that. How well he deals.
Yeah,
with Kyle
exactly.
Shanahan.
Yeah, right. What's the drop down menu?
EPA per Kyle Shanahan yelling at you. Yeah.
I love the concept of ass chewing becoming a stat that we handle. So at this point, though, I keep looking at the Seahawks, and I feel like the conversation is just. It's circular. It's the same thing. Like, Geno's pretty good and the wide receivers are great and all of these things. But it just, it doesn't pass I'm not even going to say the eye test. The Seattle thing doesn't pass the smell test to me right now. Like, Frank, you said maybe they win 8, 9, 10 games. We'll see how it breaks. I just don't think we really have any proof of concept that this is a very good team. And it doesn't mean that I don't believe, I'll die on the same hill I died coming into the season. Like, their head coach as a defensive coordinator for the Ravens players said, hey, it took a couple of years to figure out what was expected of this defense.
Yeah, that's a good point.
I think we need to be patient with Seattle, and that doesn't mean the sky's falling if this year isn't where they need to be. I think they got their guy. I think they got a lot of weapons. They've got some talent. Give them a year together to sort of figure this system out. They'll be just fine. But right now, I don't think they're actually a threat in the NFC at all.
Maybe not, but they've had a lot of injuries. We give everybody else a pass for injuries.
Who hasn't? Who hasn't?
That's the thing. Yes, I get it. But when you're missing your entire front seven for some games, it's hard to run a defense. And they still have got some of these guys out. And they're not the 49ers. That's the only thing I learned about the Seahawks last night. They're not the 49ers. The Giants loss was much more troubling to me than last night. I was just like, I've seen this movie before. This is why Pete Carroll ain't there anymore, because they lose to the 49ers by double digits every time they played them the last 6 times. I still think Seattle's going to be they're going to be okay. They have talent. I think McDonald's going to be an awesome coach. But yeah, like you said, it does take some time with the scheme. And it's just, they're not the 49ers. They're not even close yet. And they need to get there, and it's going to take some time.
Yeah, they're missing, was it the top 4 or 5 defenders on their team against Detroit, right? And they still
5
managed
out of the
to
7, I think.
Yeah, and they still managed to stay in that game, be a threat late into that game. And I don't know. You know how I am. I always focus things through quarterbacks, and I'm really curious to see if Geno suddenly stacks up some ineffective games, whether or not Sam Howell. I'm not saying that it's hard for me to believe at any point Geno Smith gets like straight up benched. Like I think we're past that point.
No.
I think like Geno's their starter. He's not
NFL
getting benched.
passing yards.
It's not. I mean, like he's right. Like it's not going to happen. But I'm like, I wonder if at some point, I don't know, if Geno gets hurt, and if Sam Howell gets an opportunity, I wonder if that then creates some kind of chaos
I've seen
and
Sam
debate
Howell
there.
play. There's no chaos. Or
I
debate.
have too. I agree. I do too. But I mean, they did when they traded for them. When they dealt for him, there were definitely some people across the league who were familiar with Sam Howell, who had crossed paths with Sam Howell or looked at him from a draft perspective or had done advanced work when he was in Washington, who said, if he gets a shot out there, just watch, he'll probably do some stuff that will now raise, he'll do some things productively that will raise some kind of a conversation.